Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
Well, Craig, it comes several times a year when some famous actor dies, and we decide to pay tribute by digging up a horror movie he or she did and reviewing it. Last month, Ray Liotta died in his sleep while filming a movie down in the Dominican Republic. I don't think a cause of death has either been determined or released yet.
Yeah.
But he was, sadly, only 67 years old. And I grew up really enjoying watching Ray Liotta. I think my first... I saw Field of Dreams. He was Shoeless Shoe Jackson in Field of Dreams. I remember seeing him there. And, of course, he was in Goodfellas in 1990, which was a great role. But I remember him the most from a 1992 thriller called Unlawful Entry. Did you ever see that one?
Yep.
Where he's the cop that, oh God, he is terrifying in that movie.
Yeah.
It is so good. And he always had this way of playing these nice guys with this sort of dark edge to them, right? Even though he had a variety of roles throughout his career, pretty successfully, didn't get too pigeonholed into one particular kind of role. But there was this stretch in the 90s where he was that creepy bad guy.
Right.
Or he was the guy you thought was really nice and charming at first and then turned out to be the bad guy. Yeah, so we dug out a movie of his from 1990 called Identity, a movie that I saw a while back and absolutely loved. It was so twisty, it was so fun, and it's chock full of stars. It's been decades since I saw it. I don't think I've seen it since the 90s until yesterday. How about you, Craig? When did you first see this movie?
You said it came out in 1990. I'm pretty sure it was 2003.
Oh, God, you're right. 2003.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know. I know I didn't see it in the theater, but I do remember seeing trailers for it, and the lead in the movie is John Cusack, and this was kind of, John Cusack's heyday, too.
Yeah.
And I remember the trailer just looking, mysterious and suspenseful and good people in it. Of course, I already said John Cusack, Ray Liotta's second build, Amanda Peet, fairly early in her career, Alfred Molina, Clea Duvall. I'm just going through the cast list, but there are, John C. McGinley, Jake Busey, Rebecca De Mornay. These were pretty big names. Maybe not, I don't know if, John Cusack, I guess, and Ray Liotta probably pretty A-list at this point. But tons and tons of recognizable people. And so I was intrigued, and I remember liking it. And I remember at the time it being very twisty and not really knowing what was going on. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that I have ever watched it since. But even watching it this time, having not seen it in 20 years, I remembered what the twist was. And if you go into it knowing what the twist is, it's actually projected pretty heavily. In hindsight, it doesn't really seem like it should have been that difficult to figure out.
Yeah, it's true.
But still an enjoyable movie, good performances, well made, well shot, and it is suspenseful and keeps you guessing.
I don't remember this being a movie that was like major headlines. I mean, I'm sure it came to the theater, but I don't remember it getting a huge buzz or huge reaction. I just remember people... It seemed to be one of those films that got a better life on video.
Maybe.
And I had actually, because of that, always assumed that it was a straight-to-video movie, which doesn't make a lot of sense for a production just chock full of all of these stars. And the director of the movie, James Mangold, I mean, gosh. I mean, before this, he did Copland, Girl Interrupted, Kate and Leopold. After Identity, he did Walk the Line, the Johnny Cash biopic, 3:10 to Yuma, Night and Day, Logan and the Wolverine. And now he's finishing up post-production, having directed and co-produced Indiana Jones 5.
Yeah.
So he's very accomplished. The movie is quite good. The writer of Identity is the same guy who wrote and directed Jack Frost. And I don't mean the Michael Keaton Jack Frost.
Right.
I mean
the one
the
we've
straight
done.
to video. The one that we've done that It's very goofy. I love that episode, by the way. I enjoyed watching that movie.
I did too. It was fun.
But yeah, he wrote this movie, and it's very twisty. It's very intricately plotted. It's just one of those keep you guessing thrillers, like what in the world is going on? And it just revolves around all of this activity that happens as these different characters come to converge on a hotel out in the middle of Nevada in the middle of the night. Just before that happens, we get a credit sequence over a psychiatrist who is, or psychologist, I never know which is which.
Right.
But he's listening to some tapes, clearly, of one of his patients, and then he gets a phone call calling him to the judge's chambers in the middle of the night again because his patient is about to be executed, but his request for a stay of execution has been granted. And so they're going to sort of like discuss it out with the judge and the lawyers and everybody else involved in the case to see if they will allow him to. Because
some new evidence has been discovered. Like, this is very last minute.
Yes.
Like, he was scheduled to be executed tonight, but there's been some new evidence submitted that won't necessarily clear him. And all of this is vague.
Yeah, you don't really know.
Right. And you kind of hear things. In like you said, over the credits sequence, we're seeing like news clippings and files and things, and we kind of hear the doctor, who I think's name is Malik, and he's talking presumably to his patient and talking about his patient. And he says something like his mother was a prostitute, he was a child found in a local motel, and then you hear him ask,
"Do you understand why you're talking with me now?"
Yeah, you're supposed to be good with headaches. I need something more than aspirin. You know what I mean?
You remember the murders?
I remember that Columbia is the capital of South Carolina. I remember that
there had been, 6 murders at an apartment complex, and that's it. Like, it's all just kind of very vague. I mean, and if you're not really listening, those things will just kind of roll past. But ultimately, even those little details suggest kind of what is going on. The movie, and I remembered this. It starts out with you hear somebody quietly reciting a verse of a poem, and as soon as I heard it, I remembered it. Like I paused the movie and typed it down from memory. That's 20 years ago that I saw it, and for some reason it is stuck with me.
Me too.
As I was going up the stair, I met a man who wasn't there. He wasn't there again today. I wish he'd go away.
Just
so creepy.
It is so creepy, and it's just one little verse of a poem. In it, a character in the movie claims to have written it, which isn't true. It was a pre-existing poem, but it is spooky and sets a good kind of mysterious atmosphere, which is appropriate because this is a mystery. But part of what's kind of jarring about it is that it cuts between these two stories, and for much of the movie, I would say a good 3/4 of the movie, I mean, really nothing is confirmed until the last 15 minutes, but I think you kind of start to pick up on what's going on before that. But immediately, after that very brief segment about this murderer and his stay of execution, then we cut to this entirely different story, which is set in the desert of Nevada or California. I don't remember. I know that it was shot in Lancaster, in the desert in Lancaster, California, which I've visited. It's very near Los Angeles. And it is beautiful desert out there. Much of it, I think the majority of it, was shot on a soundstage. It was an elaborate set on a soundstage, this motel that they erected. And it was the same soundstage that the Emerald City from Wizard of Oz was shot on.
It'd have to be pretty big. It seems like they constructed a whole motel here on this soundstage, because the whole movie pretty much takes place at night in the middle of a rainstorm. So.
And it's raining the whole time.
Heavy.
I would think that would just be miserable to be wet for weeks and weeks filming. And I guess the actors were pretty regularly sick. Like, they just kind of kept passing colds back and forth because they were in these wet conditions all the time.
Oh, man.
But it's very atmospheric, almost even a little dreamlike, which is fitting, ultimately. But we have this whole almost annoyingly large cast of characters. Like, I was trying to keep track of everybody who was there, and I knew it was an ensemble piece, but they just kept showing up. I'm like, oh my god, like, all right, that's enough. Let's get to it.
Only annoying for guys who are trying to keep track of names and things for a podcast.
Yeah, true, but even if not, it's still quite a few characters to keep track of, and it's also a lot of characters to build intrigue for. They have to be spread pretty thin because there's so many of them, and it's only an hour-and-a-half movie.
It's true, but you know what? One thing I think that's really a strength of this movie is it gets into the intrigue pretty quickly. And I would say by the time 10 or 15 minutes are finished, you kind of feel like everybody's got a little dark secret.
Yeah.
Like, everybody's a little shady. There's something going on. You don't quite know with each person what might be going on, but you just get a sense that nobody's right.
Right.
And I think the movie, it's a function of the writing, obviously, and the plotting, but it's really clever. And I think that really, if you didn't have that element, if the movie had taken too long to build up the intrigue and the suspense, I think it would have worn hard on me. And I think another thing you have to do, right, is to introduce all these characters in an interesting way. And, before we realize anything shady's going on, I think, once again, a really great device is employed here, where the events leading up to this night where they all converge are kind of told in a reverse chronological order.
Out of sequence, right.
Yeah, and I thought that was so cool. There's this man in a hotel room just sitting there. It's, raining outside. He's watching, like, Wheel of Fortune on TV, and there's a bang, bang, bang on the door, and this guy bursts in holding a woman in his arms, and he's like, she's bleeding, quick, do you have a phone? And then there's, like, a freeze frame. That was an interesting choice, too. I've never seen this before, where there's, like a 2-second freeze of just the frame, and that's what leads us into the flashback. Not like a flash to white, not like a whoosh kind of sound effect or a crossfade. Just, that was odd. It was very jarring. Anyway, yeah, and that leads us into a quick little flashback of this guy nervously driving down the road in the middle of the day or in the evening. He's got his wife in the front seat. This guy's name is George, and his wife's name is Alice, and they have a little boy in the back seat named Timmy. And you get the sense right away that this guy's a little mousy, a little nervous.
Yeah.
They seem to be lost or something. Oh, yeah, they get a flat tire. They get a flat tire by the side of the road. And when he comes down to check out what was causing the flat tire, he sees that it's a woman's extremely sharp high-heeled shoe. In the meantime, it's starting to rain outside, and Timmy's inside looking at the window, and his mom is on the road side of the car, kind of like smiling at him under an umbrella, kind of puts her hand up against the window, and then suddenly, boom, gets completely wiped out. I think before he gets wiped out, though, we see where the stiletto came from, right?
Yeah, I mean, it cuts back and forth to these different characters, kind of just connecting. And it's not even like it's connections between the characters. It's just kind of showing how this series, they're all connected through this series of events. The mom gets hit, obviously we already knew she was going to be injured, so when she was standing there at night in the rain on the side of the road, I'm like, lady, you are going to get wiped out.
Like,
right, you seem like a nice lady, but maybe don't stand in the middle of the road, at night in a rainstorm. Yeah, it turns out that the shoe had flown out of the luggage of another character, Amanda Peet's character, whose name is Paris. Her backstory is nebulous, as are all of them. Like, We just see her with a middle-aged man. She's got him chained up in a bed, but like in a sexy way, but it kind of seems like maybe she's conning him, like she's going to rob him or something, which we don't really see happen.
Well, she takes his, she lights, she's got a pile of whipped cream on his chest. Does this really happen in real life? I'm not sure. I guess everyone has their kinks, but, yeah, he's got like a pile of whipped cream on his chest. I guess she's like going to eat it off of his chest or something. And there's a couple candles in there, and she sings happy birthday to him and uses like his lighter. I guess it's like a Zippo or something, but it's like gold plated. And as she turns around and is going for something else, you can see her slip it into her purse. So I think we do kind of see her rob him a little bit.
And then later you do see she's got like a little case, a little leather case in her luggage that's got stacks of money in it and stuff. So maybe this is what she does. Again, that's that thing, like everybody's a little shady. Like everybody's kind of hiding something in their luggage or being fishy about their past. And it's not everybody. You know, the family, George and Alice and Timmy, they seem
fine.
Yeah,
normal.
I mean, just have found themselves in this situation, but really everybody else, you wonder what's really going on with them. But anyway, she gets hit. Turns out that John Cusack's character, Ed, is the person who hit her. He is a driver for a famous or somewhat famous actress named Caroline, played by Rebecca De Mornay. I almost didn't recognize her.
I didn't either. I honestly didn't even recognize her until I saw the credits.
I think it's just because she has dark hair, and I'm used to seeing her with blonde hair.
Yeah, that's probably it.
And she's also, I don't know if she's just padded or what, but her breasts are really emphasized, so it looks like she's got these great big knockers. I mean, she's beautiful. I mean, she looks great, but I was also kind of surprised. Her role is pretty small. She's the first one to get picked off. We then see, through different characters' perspectives, through Ed's perspective and through Paris's perspective, we see that the road is washed out, phone lines are down, Paris's car breaks down, Ed ends up picking her up. She tells him the road's flooded, but he tries to cross it anyway, and so then his car is stranded. They end up getting picked up by a young couple, Jenny, played by Clea Duvall, who was pretty big in the 90s, kind of started out in teen roles, but is very much still working. You don't know at first what their relationship is, but it turns out they're newlyweds with a lot of tension between them. His name is Lou. And so everybody begins converging at this motel. Eventually, a police officer, Officer Rhodes, played by Ray Liotta, shows up in a very classic Ray Liotta role.
Yeah.
He on several occasions played this kind of brooding, dark cop. And that's exactly what he is here. Ray Liotta, by all accounts, was a family man. He described himself as a homebody. Said that in his real life he had never, ever been in a physical altercation, but he's just got an air about him.
Yeah.
He is charming. He's handsome, but he's also got kind of a rugged look. But at the same time, he's got these beautiful, like, piercing blue eyes.
He does.
And so he's just one of those characters who he has a presence about him that works really well for certain characters, and he's a good actor. He studied acting. He was still in acting classes when he lobbied for and got, one of his most notable roles in Goodfellas. And I think that he took the craft very seriously, even though he was not a method actor. When asked what he learned about himself from playing the different characters that he'd played, he said nothing. That's not what he's in it for. His theory on acting is really what mine is too, and I think it just comes from an imaginative childhood in my experience. You know, I grew up just playing pretend with my sister all the time. We would just make up characters and scenarios and play them out. And that's what he says about acting. You know, it's just pretending.
Mm-hmm.
It's trying to figure out, you know, who your character is, but not personalizing it to yourself. He said that he thinks that actors who try to put too much of themselves into their roles end up being a little bit flat as actors. You know, it's always just some version of them. So, you know, this is a guy who's thoughtful about the roles that he selected. He was offered a lot of roles in the same vein. Big roles. He was offered Tony Soprano in The Sopranos, turned it down. Tim Burton offered him Batman. He turned it down. So he was selective. And he did want to do a variety of things. He did some things for the money. He did a family movie called Dumbo Drop for the money. He voiced a character in
Grand Theft Auto. SpongeBob SquarePants movie.
Yeah, and
yeah.
I respect that too. You know, we've talked about other actors like that. Like Michael Caine did Jaws 4 so he could have a vacation in Hawaii and build a nice house. That good for you. It's a job.
I was just going to say that. People don't realize acting's a job, you know? You do it to make money, and you do it, and you know, how many of us can do something that fun, you know, to make money? So you can have some fun with it, have different roles. I don't know why people think, you know, this... Of course, we have later learned that poor Bruce Willis is not in the best of health.
Right,
but, you know, he and Nicolas Cage maybe is a better example, has just been doing a string of just goofy movies, right? Just off-the-wall stuff. I mean, a guy who we typically think of as, like, National Treasure and, you know, Con Air and The Rock, you know, this A-list action star. And everybody says, oh, look at how far he's fallen. What is he thinking, taking all these silly roles, direct to video? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's an actor. This is what he does. He acts. He's like, why does he always have to, you know, sit around and twiddle his thumbs until someone calls him up for another Oscar shot type role, you know?
Right.
Forget it.
Well, and just because, just because a movie is, you know, off the wall or different doesn't just mean it's bad. I've seen some of Nick Cage's most recent stuff, and it's weird and it's bizarre, but it's interesting and would probably be really interesting to work on. And Ray Liotta did, you know, some other stuff too. I remember he was in a movie, I don't know if it was late 90s, early 2000s, but a movie called Karina, which was a period piece that he did with, I think it was set in the 60s. He played a widowed father of a young girl, and he was kind of struggling to support his small family and you know, take care of his daughter, and he ended up hiring a housekeeper played by Whoopi Goldberg. And of course, set against the backdrop of the 60s, there was, you know, racial stuff to deal with. If I remember correctly, his character and Whoopi Goldberg's character formed a tight relationship that I think maybe even got romantic. I don't remember. But it was, you know, it was a very soft piece. Nothing like he had done before. It was a cute movie. I remember liking it. He just seemed like an all-around good guy. And I look at TMZ every day, and they always do celebrity death announcements. And when I scrolled down and saw Ray Liotta dead at 67, it kind of, I don't know. I'm not like a Ray Liotta super fan, but he's just been kind of so ubiquitous in my life. He's always been around. He's
always been there. Like Rob Lowe, kind of, right?
You always see him in stuff.
I always put them in the same category.
I think the most recent thing that he does several projects a year. One of the things that I remember him from most recently was he played himself in an episode of Modern Family, and he played himself very humbly. The characters in the show were going on like a celebrity homes tour, and they thought they were at Barbra Streisand's house, and it turns out that the star map was just really dated, and she didn't live there anymore, and Ray Liotta lived there, and so they were all really disappointed that they couldn't meet Barbra Streisand, and it was just Ray Liotta.
That's hilarious.
But he felt bad for them, and so he like took them to Barbara Streisand's house and,
That is so funny.
And helped them talk to her through her driveway intercom. It was cute, and he was playing himself in a very humble way, and I just got the sense that was really the kind of guy he was. And so when I saw that he had passed away, I was sad.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a young man, but by today's standards, he's not an old man either. And I guess, he goes the way we kind of all hope to go, or at least the way I hope to go in my sleep. I hopefully he didn't suffer. Again, I don't think any cause of death has been released, but he was working, so if he was struggling with something behind the scenes, he was doing it with dignity. I'm sure that we'll find out maybe even before this episode airs. His cause of death will be revealed. But sad to see him go, but nice to kind of go back and look at him in one of his kind of classic type of roles here. And he plays it well.
Yeah.
I really enjoy his performance here. Much like the other characters, to some extent he's flat, but that flatness kind of comes with the fact that you have to keep him a mystery. You can't lay out his character. It has to be
revealed over time.
Over time, and even ultimately in the end, you still have to kind of question. Nothing is ever really certain.
That's right.
But he shows up and he is transporting a prisoner, Robert Maine, played by Jake Busey. Jake Busey is Gary Busey's son, right?
Yes, he is. Yeah.
And
I remember him.
He looks a lot like his dad.
Troopers.
Starship Troopers.
He does, yeah. He's got that smile. He's got kind of an evil smile about him.
He's a menacing guy, too. I've always kind of liked him. He always kind of plays kind of a badass. He's a big guy. Ray Liotta is like 5'11" and a half. And I think Jake Busey's even taller than that. He's a big guy. And, of course, here, he's a convict in chains, so very menacing. The other thing that struck me as funny was this guy, Larry, who is the guy who's running the motel, like, he's having a good night. Like, this roadside motel in the middle of nowhere, in a matter of about 20 minutes, is completely booked.
That's right. Does it happen every time it rains? He might have just gotten the perfect spot.
Ultimately, in the grand scheme of the movie, that kind of adds to the surreal nature of it, again, which is fitting. I'm dancing around the twist, but there is a twist. This is not just some happenstance. These people are all here for a reason. It's not an easily explained logical reason. But ultimately it makes sense.
It also is a little bit of shades of Agatha Christie, right?
Oh, absolutely. They even reference it.
Mm-hmm. It's like everybody coming together, like, and then where there were none, everybody comes together to an old mansion or something like that. This is just the old motel, and they're just stuck there. And then people eventually people start dying. Ginny and Lou go back to their room. And there are little things, again, that kind of happen that eventually kind of turn out to be important. She looks at the room number and says, 6. Well, at least we got a good number. And then as they slam the door, like the 6 kind of comes loose and it swivels down to make a 9. So Ray Liotta's there with the prisoner. He goes into his room and he chains the guy to the toilet. Somebody asks about Timmy, and John Cusack's character starts sewing up the wound because they can't get to a hospital because there's no way, like everything's blocked one way and the other way. So
phones are down, police radio isn't working. They're completely alone.
Exactly. So he plays nurse to the mother, Alice. She's just knocked out basically, and sews up her neck. And he asks if Timmy's going to be okay.
Hey, is the little boy, is he all right? He hasn't said a word since the accident. I don't know if he's
No. He didn't talk much ever since then. I'm his stepfather. His father, 2 years ago, he left. Little temper problem.
he witnessed some murders or something. His dad's now in jail, and he hasn't really spoken since then, and I'm actually his stepfather.
This is when everybody... there's like a montage of shade.
Yeah, this is it.
Like Rhodes, the cop, kind of ogles Paris at the vending machine.
He's being creepy on her. Yeah.
Cheetos for dinner, huh? That don't seem right.
You got a better idea?
I work mess in the service. Maybe the diner's open. I could whip something up for you.
You got change for $1.
I don't know. Let me see. There you go. You got a name?
Paris.
Paris, huh? I'll get it. Never been.
Well, you ain't going tonight.
Yeah, right.
And walks off.
And that's when we saw she has that small case of cash. Larry seems to be shady, kind of hiding something. We see that Rhodes' shirt has what I thought was... Because he's wearing a jacket, but at some point he takes it off when he's alone in his room. And we see that the shirt under his jacket has what I thought was a bullet hole in it.
Looks like a hole with blood around it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The manager's hiding the stuff. Cusack has taken some pills for something, and the prisoner's trying to work his way free. It looks like he's about to do it.
Right. And Caroline, the actress, I really wish Rebecca De Mornay got more screen time because I really like her a lot as an actress. But she just kind of plays your typical bitchy starlet in this, and she wanders out of her room looking for cell bars. It's raining, of course, so she tears down the shower curtain, is like walking around under the shower curtain, and then she is murdered by an unseen hand, and that's at a half an hour in. So of this hour and a half movie, the whole first half hour is introducing all of these characters.
And I didn't think it was slow either. I mean, I thought it was kind of interesting. You're clearly building up for something. There's clearly going to be a payoff for everything that happens.
Right.
And so I had the patience for it.
It only felt slow to me because it took me 45 minutes to watch the first half hour because I kept pausing to write down everybody's character name and the actor name. So after that, it seems to move pretty quickly. Like Ed finds her severed head in the dryer, and they also find her room key in there, but
it's not hers.
No, it's number 9. Like
it's the cop's room key.
Ultimately, people keep getting picked off, and every time somebody gets picked off, they find a key on their body, and it's basically a countdown. It's in sequence.
But that's a pretty big moment when they realize that. I mean, that's pretty creepy. Like, how would all of these keys end up on these bodies in a countdown? Especially because some of the people end up dying in what are clearly freak accidents.
Right.
So it starts to feel like, wait, is something supernatural happening? And Jenny at one point even suggests that. Once she says it's a countdown, she says, do you think it has to do with the dead bodies? And they're like, what do you mean?
The burial ground.
Didn't you read the brochures and in the lobby? This was a Indian burial ground around here where the government had pushed all the Indians out here, and they starved. They couldn't get any water, and they died, and then they just buried them here. So there's this hint that maybe there's something supernatural going on as well. In the meantime, we keep bouncing back to this meeting that's going on in the judges' chambers. And I think it's around this point that they're talking, and they're talking about how this... what's the name of the guy? The guy's name is... The prisoner. The prisoner.
Malcolm Rivers.
He says, Malcolm, he has a dissociative personality disorder. So he has basically what we would call multiple personalities. And he's like, as you know, in this state, like, we can't put someone to death if they were committed a murder that, they were unaware or they were incapable, kind of like the insanity type thing, or he was mentally disabled and didn't know what he was doing kind of thing. And so there's you just get this sense that he needs to try to prove that to these guys in this room. And he said, and then one of the guys speaks up and says, well, we can't do anything until, the client gets here. And he says, well, he's on his way, but we can talk about it now. And at that moment, I'm thinking, so the prisoner that Ray Liotta was transporting, played by, Busey, is the guy. So he's wrapped up in this, in that he is now this murderer has arrived at the hotel. I think that's sort of our first little red herring that's thrown at us.
Yeah.
Because as soon as the first woman is killed, they go in and they notice the prisoner's escaped.
Right.
And there's an odd sequence that's also very telling where I think it's after the second murder, he's running. He takes off across, we see a shot of him taking off across the street and across a field.
The convict, right.
And he sees, he's clearly going away from the motel, and he sees in the distance some lights and another building. And so he goes to that and he goes inside, and it's like a kitchen, like a kind of an eating, like a restaurant that has obviously not been used in ages, and chairs are up on tables and things. It's a little dusty. But then when he goes he hears a noise outside. When he goes to the window, he sees he's at the motel again. Mm-hmm. It's just a building as part of the motel. He goes, what the hell? As he looks and he sees Ed slowly walking, towards the door. They all think it's him, right? Because obviously he's escaped.
Right.
And so when they find the severed head, and the second person who dies is...
Is it Lou?
Lou, yeah. Lou and Ginny. This is when we find out that Lou and Ginny are just married, but she pretended she was pregnant, and then she kind of admits she wasn't, and he gets kind of mad at her. She locks herself in the bathroom.
Kind of mad. It's really volatile. Like, it seems like he's violent and abusive.
Yeah, and she's screaming.
Yeah, she's screaming. He's pounding on the door, but then all of a sudden it goes quiet. And she opens the door and just sees a silhouette of somebody with a knife. So she goes out her back window. Meanwhile, everybody else comes to see what all the screaming is about, and they go in and they find Lou dead, stabbed to death up against the wall.
They find the convict inside that little restaurant or whatever, and they tie him up to a pole in there on a chair, and he's just being creepy and weird.
Well, right, because Larry is like hiding something. Like, it seems like he's hiding something in one of the refrigerators, and the convict sees, and he's like, what are you hiding in there? And Larry's like, oh, nothing. And he's like, it's all right, Larry, we all have our secrets. I'm sitting on a big one. Like, there's all these, all these suggestions that there are things that we don't know, and there are, and they're all kind of eventually revealed. But even when some of the little mysteries are revealed, it just blows the mystery up even more.
Yeah, it's very tense like that.
Yeah.
Ed goes and gets some film cameras, some of those old disposable cameras that we used to have. This is so cute, right? This movie that, like, cell phones were not... It's so funny, like, earlier in the film when they pull this woman over, this couple over, and he's like, do any of you have a cell phone? They're like, no, we don't. And he's like, we need a cell phone. Are you sure you don't have one? They're like, no, we don't. I'm thinking, nobody in this day and age doesn't have a cell phone. Right. It's not even a question. You would never be stranded anywhere. The best you could do is no signal, which, obviously the actress had. It's the same thing with the camera, right? He had to go and find these disposable cameras because turns out he used to be a cop. Uh-huh. So he goes in, he starts taking pictures of the body. And Paris keeps running out when Ed, who's quite protective of her, is like, "What? Stop, you got to be with me. You can't keep running out. I told you not to go out." And she hangs with him for a while, and they chat a little bit. We learn a bit more about him and how he was on the force, and he just got jaded, basically. And there's this moment where he tried to talk this woman off the ledge, and he had been trained for this sort of situation and supposed to tell her all kinds of nice things about who's going to miss her and all that. But then he just kind of like, in the moment, he couldn't think of anything positive to tell her. She ended up jumping, and then he realized that, I don't know, he's jaded and he needed to take a medical leave of absence, which is what he did. And she tells this story, I think it's at this point, of where she has these hopes and dreams of going to Florida and just opening an orange grove and raising oranges and lemons and limes. Actually, I think that comes a little later.
It comes later, right? Because eventually they think maybe there's some connection between all of them, which there is, but they don't figure it out immediately. They had left Larry guarding the prisoner, but when they're constantly coming in and out of rooms and seeing other people moving from room to room. It's kind of hard to keep track of where everybody is and where they're supposed to be, but they see Larry out, which he's not supposed to be. He's left his guard post, and so they go in to make sure that the prisoner's still there, and he is, but he's dead with a baseball bat shoved all the way down his throat. And that was weird. And I read that somebody, I don't remember who it was, somebody on the crew asked to keep that prop, and did, and kept it in a closet in the building where they worked. I assume some sort of film production building, but a maid found it eventually and it scared her to death, and so he had to get rid of it, or at least get it out of the building. But because Larry had been carrying around that bat, they assumed that he killed the convict, so they tie him all up. He's swearing up and down he didn't do it. He's also shady because he has the actress's wallet on him, which he claims that, I mean, we saw that he saw it when she was checking into her room. It was full of cash. So he claims that he only stole it after she was dead, which is, perfectly possible, but still shady enough that I would want him tied up too. Before they tie him up, they're threatening to, and he grabs Paris and holds a knife to her throat. She kind of kicks back, and they both fall into the freezer, revealing a frozen dead body. So that's even more suspicious for him. He runs off, takes off in the truck. The little kid, Timmy, is in the path of the truck, so his stepdad, George, runs to try to knock him out of the way. George ends up getting hit by the truck and pinned to the wall and is immediately dead. There's no question about that.
Yeah, that's pretty brutal.
Oh, gosh.
But then they all end up kind of in this hotel room, and there's a whole bunch of, back and forth chatter about who could it be and all this. And that's, I think, at the point where they discuss, is this some kind of countdown, like with the keys being found on people? It doesn't make any sense. Timmy goes into the other room to check on his mom, and they just kind of let him do that. In the meantime, they're just chatting, and little things kind of come out where it turns out that each of the characters, one of them shares a birthday with another, one of them went to school near where the other person did, and one of them grew up in a town where the other person was born, and that kind of thing. And then they go into the room, and they realize that the mother is dead. And as Ed is closing her eyes and Timmy is crying, and they lead him out of there, Ed looks down and sees a key is under the bed. And when he pulls it out, it's the next number down. It's like room, I don't know, number 6 or number 5 or whatever. And they're like, this is crazy. How would this room key be on this body? And then they get the idea to go out and check the body of
George,
who was hit by the truck in a freak accident.
Right.
And sure enough, they pull out of his jacket a room key. It's 5. And they're like, what in the hell is going on? Because obviously that was an accident. Nobody caused that to happen.
So Ed tells Paris to take Tim and Jenny and just drive. She's like, well, the road's out. And he's like, well, if you get to some place where the road is out, just turn around and drive back the other way. And if the road's out again, just keep going back and forth until dawn. Basically, he just wants to get them out of there, which makes sense.
Yeah.
Not a bad plan, in my opinion.
No.
But she doesn't want to leave. But Jenny and Tim run to the car ahead of her. And while she's still kind of arguing about leaving, the car explodes. And they go and they run and they put it out with a fire extinguisher, but there are no bodies in it, which they think is really bizarre. And then they start running around to where all of the other bodies were, and all of the bodies are missing, and there's no evidence of blood or violence or anything. It's just gone. It's unexplainable. And if you haven't figured it out at this point, there's no logical explanation for what's going on. Something bizarre has to be going on. And Rhodes, Larry, Ed, and Jenny are the only ones that are left. And that's when they realize that they all have the same birthday, and they check the IDs from the hotel records. All of them had the same exact birthday. Most of them, their last names are states, or some deviation of a state. And then this is kind of where we get the big reveal. Ed is kind of freaking out, trying to figure out what's going on, and he recites the poem from the beginning of the movie. And as he's doing that, he starts to hear the voice of the doctor, and then he flashes into that meeting, that hearing, that evaluation. And the doctor, Dr. Malik, is questioning him. First, he asks who he's talking to, and then he says, it's a long time since I've talked to you. Then he just lays it out. This is where, and this is about 15 minutes out from the end, and he just lays out precisely what's going on.
Yeah, he basically says to him, well, Ed is confused, right? And it's cool the way this is shot. There's like a bright light on his face. He just looks a little otherworldly. And he says to him,
Do you recognize this man?
No.
Well, that man, Edward, is Malcolm Rivers. He's had a very troubled life. He was arrested 4 years ago and convicted of the murder of 6 people in a violent rampage.
Who did this?
Detective, please. Edward, listen to me. When faced with an intense trauma, a child's mind may fracture, creating disassociated identities. That's exactly what happened to Malcolm Rivers. He developed a condition that is commonly known as multiple personality syndrome.
Why are you telling me this?
Because you, Edward, are one of his personalities.
you have just been through this treatment to where all of your personalities are forced to confront each other. And, Ed is saying, well, I was at a hotel where people are dying. And he says, we knew there would be violence in this. That's normal. But he's like, you will be executed, but we can stay the execution if you can convince the judge that the last person left, basically, as all of his personalities slip away, is not the killer.
Right.
Because then that means now that you're safe and you're not going to harm anybody. It's such a convoluted, crazy thing. But it's fun. It's super fun.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is interesting is that he's talking to this guy and he's not saying you have dissociative personality disorder. He's saying Malcolm has personality disorder and you are just one of the personalities that he's manifested. Mm-hmm. He's basically telling him you're not real. And Ed is saying, no, I am real. I live in Studio City. I used to be a cop, blah, blah, blah. He's like, nope, that's just all made up. Yeah. Look in the mirror. And he looks in the mirror and he sees Malcolm. Malcolm, by the way, is played by Pruitt Taylor Vince, who is this portly, bald guy who I know we have seen in at least one other movie that we've covered. But he's easily recognizable because he's got these super, super shifty eyes. Like, his eyes just kind of flicker back and forth all the time. He's good at looking unhinged, and that's what he sees. That's what Ed sees when he looks. And the guy says, Edward, I need your help. The killer cannot survive. And Ed kind of pops back in to the motel setting. Paris, meanwhile, checks the cop car and sees that the radio has been disabled. Now, Rhodes has been telling everybody that he's been trying the radio periodically and it's just not working. We see now that actually the radio has been completely disabled. And then, this late in the movie, we get the truth about Rhodes. Which I thought was actually really clever.
Yeah, she reaches into the glove compartment and pulls out 2 files. And it turns out that both Rhodes and that other guy are both prisoners. And then again, that freeze frame, and we get a flashback to those 2 being transported in the back of the car by an actual police officer. Rhodes ends up having some shiv taped to his leg, which he then pulls out. And through this slit or something, some kind of opening in the back of the seat, he manages to stab this guy in the back. They pull the body out and they switch. He basically switches his clothes. That's why the shirt that he was wearing had a blood stain and a hole in the back of it that he covered up with his jacket. So yeah, they were both prisoners, but he was pretending to be the cop escorting the prisoner. It was pretty smart. So this is the interesting point. So now we all assume, okay, he must be the killer. And at this point, of course, it all wraps up quite quickly. Ed grabs a gun, and Paris runs to him and tells him this, and Ed's kind of like, I know. And at the same time, Liotta's character has a gun.
Rhodes chases around Paris and Larry for a little while. He ends up killing Larry.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like a Mexican standoff kind of thing. They both shoot each other. Well, it's not Mexican standoff, but they both shoot each other very quickly.
Well, that's Ed. Larry's the hotel guy.
Oh, you're talking about the hotel guy.
Yeah,
right.
he kills him first, and then he really, he's waving guns at them and threatening to shoot them. He just wants the keys to the truck. Paris has the keys to the truck, but she doesn't want to, and eventually she runs away, runs into Ed. And Ed's like, I got this. And he just starts walking towards Rhodes, and they both raise their guns, and they both shoot each other multiple times.
Show me the keys to the truck, Ed. Show me the keys to the truck. Stay there. Stay there.
And there's a brief exchange between them. Like they almost embrace. It's more really that they're like falling together, but they almost embrace, and they mouth words to each other. And originally there was dialogue, but they muted it out because they feared that it projected the ending too easily.
It was a wise choice.
So I'll come back to that. Right.
Yeah.
Rhodes dies. Ed falls to the ground. Paris comes and talks to him, and she's like, what did you see, or something like that? And he says, I saw you in an orange grove. And we also see, it's kind of fading back and forth between him and Malcolm, the dissociative personality guy, and he's saying the same thing. I saw you in an orange grove. And so it seems like, Jenny is the last one standing. The killer is dead. And so in the morning, Jenny is able to drive away in her truck. And we cut back to the hearing, and the judge decides that Malcolm's execution will be stayed and that he will be transferred to a mental hospital because he's no longer a threat. The violent personality within him is dead. Jenny arrives at her orange grove. Everything's beautiful and peaceful. And she goes to dig, in her grove, and she digs up the last key. The number one key. And she looks up.
And Timmy is standing there.
Mm-hmm.
He's got her tool.
Menacingly, yeah.
Menacingly like Damien in The Omen. He's got an ugly look on his face. And it turns out that all along, Timmy was the killer. And it just kind of shows, again, a little bit of it's nebulous. But again, when you realize this is all happening in the head of a guy, in the guy's imagination.
Right. This isn't a real kid. In fact, logically, it makes sense. I mean, if he witnessed murders when he was a kid and his personalities were fractured when he was a kid, it would probably,
He might be the...
Yeah, that personality, that kind of frozen, stunted personality, it makes sense that would be the violent force in his mind. The flashbacks that they show are very, very brief, but as unbelievable as it is that this kid could, in this Machiavellian way, plot all of this out, I believed it. Just little things that we saw, like nobody questioned it when he walked into his mom's room alone.
Yeah.
We see that he smothered her to death in that moment. He saw the guy who was trying to escape. He saw him get into the truck and start it up, so he ran out into the path of the truck intentionally.
So that his dad would jump in there and push him away, right?
Right.
He even supposedly led his mother to the window to get hit by the car in the first place, or kept her there, So again, these things might not really, and I guess hotwired a car to blow up because it shows him walking away from the car exploding in the background.
And I knew that was, I felt that they covered it well by making all of the bodies disappear, but this is a horror movie, and anytime somebody dies off screen and you don't see them in the aftermath, it should be a major red flag. But
yeah, exactly.
Anyway, Malcolm's in the back of the transport vehicle. There's a driver and his doctor in the front, and he becomes agitated, and you hear him start to say, and then it flashes to Timmy and Jenny. Together they say, "Whores don't get a second chance." And then Timmy kills Jenny. Malcolm busts through the cage of the transport vehicle and kills Malik, and we just see the van veer off onto the side of the road, and then we hear the voice of Timmy reciting the poem from the beginning again, and that's it. The end. Credits.
It's a cool double twist.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it immensely. I'd forgotten the second bit. I remembered the bit about this was all happening in his head. I had forgotten that it turned out that Timmy was the killer, and it had that bleaker twist ending, and I really, really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
It's funny, too, because it made me think of something else. And when I was watching the movie, I was thinking, well, of course, just because Ray Liotta's character is not who he says he is, doesn't immediately make him the killer. Right? Like logically, that doesn't fit. But doesn't that follow the pattern of every single thriller movie you've ever seen? Right?
Yeah.
It's always somebody who's not who they say they are who turns out to be the one who's killing everybody.
Well, and if it had been him, it would have been too obvious.
Yeah.
That bit of dialogue that they cut out, Ray Liotta kind of whispers into John Cusack's ear, "I didn't do this." And Ed says, "I know." And then they both die. Now, I don't know what Ed knew.
Well, I think
knew,
Ed... Because Ed is a part of
oh, okay. That makes sense.
I think ultimately, because again, this is still taking place in this guy's imagination.
Yeah, one
so
guy.
to some degree, yeah, he kind of knows anyway. But yeah, that's also why I gave it a pass to where Timmy could have killed all these people. It's all just happening in this guy's head anyway. So as long as it makes enough logical sense, it could work. Fantastic. Ray Liotta gets a lot of screen time in this.
He does.
We had originally considered maybe doing Hannibal because he has a pretty notorious scene in there. But I think it's a pretty short scene. He's kind of a minor character. And so we thought this was a meatier role of his horror roles. And like you said, he's done a wide variety of roles. We were talking about him earlier. And when you just kind of talk about assumptions, I mean, I always thought he was Italian. I mean, his last name's Liotta. He played these, gangsters. He's got this kind of New Jersey accent, typically. And when I was reading about him, I was surprised to find out that he was actually an orphan. He was left at an orphanage, abandoned by his parents, and it was his adoptive father was Italian, and that's where he picked up that name. And then I guess in 1990 or 2000, I guess somewhere in the 2000s, he actually hired a private investigator to track down his birth mother, and he found out he actually is of Scottish descent. And so that explains those piercing baby blue eyes that he's got there, I guess. But yeah, what a great character. Like you said, I feel similarly. Like, I didn't cry tears, but I was like, oh, Ray Liotta. Yeah, he's just always been around, and I've always enjoyed seeing him in movies. And it's just kind of sad that he's not with us anymore. But once again, if I'm going to find a way to, we're all going to go sometime, and going in my sleep would be my top choice. I think. So.
Yeah, and I say this all the time. It's sad that he's gone, but look what he accomplished in his life, and not only in his career, but he was a family man. He was married. He had a kid, and I think that he was very well respected in the industry, not only as a performer, which I think that he was very much respected as a performer, but just as a man. I think that he was well liked. I think that he was regarded as being very professional, somebody that people wanted to work with. This was a guy who was able to turn down roles, who was able to take the roles that he wanted, was able to branch out, and not many of us have those kinds of opportunities, and he seized them. And I think that hopefully, I'm sure that given the choice, he would have preferred to have more time with his family, but the life that he did lead was full. A good guy, and I'm sure he'll be missed.
Well, thank you again for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend. You can find us online. If you just Google Two Guys and a Chainsaw Podcast, you'll find our website. You might find our Patreon page, where you can certainly become a member if you'd like, Twitter feed, and you'll find our webpage, twoguys.red40net.com. Just leave us a message any one of those places. Let us know what you'd like us to do in the future, and what you thought of this episode as well. Until next time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With Two Guys and a Chainsaw.